Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to be talking about some very fun things. Hopefully, it will be a light and fun-filled session for all of us. And we hope to learn about each other as much as we hope to tell you about our work. This is a subject about, this is a conversation about comics and graphic novels and art and how visual images can be part of important storytelling narratives. And I thought of a couple of ways that I wanted to introduce this subject to you, and this is going to be just one of them. Uh, when we start off as human beings, as babies, we start off with images that are very poorly defined. Babies can see 2 or 3 feet in front of them, if that, and not even with color. Slowly as we grow, we start to see colors. Slowly as we grow, we start to see better shapes. Language and words come in much, much later. The way we experience our world to begin is visuals. The way we process our reality is in the things we see. And at some point, we come to words. And words help us abstract and codify, and they improve communication by becoming a code to refer to all the things we see and all the ways we feel about them. I like to think about this because I'm in the business of playing with both words and images and thinking about which is good for what job. But today we live in a very peculiarly word-heavy society. In this word-heavy society, we are assaulted by words since the moment we wake up. There are tweets, there are emails, there are messages. Most of our conversations with most of the people in our lives are also just words, text written digitally or somewhere else, read and interpreted in various different ways. And while this has helped us so much in communication, I feel this also strips us of a very important part of what makes us humans in this world. And this is something that I like to think I am trying to improve with the work that I do. So as I was introduced, I am a writer, I'm an author, and I'm a sneaky artist. This is a job title I made up for myself. And as I discovered, you're allowed to do that kind of thing if you can get away with it. I started drawing my world because I was supremely frustrated with words. I was trying to be a novelist. I was in the middle of a PhD program to become a neuroscientist, which I quit so that I could write the great Indian novel. And since I'm not here to talk to you about that, you know that that didn't go very well. Writing a novel, in case any of you haven't tried, is really hard work. And I wasn't ready for it, it seems. I got very angry with words at one point, and I decided I'm not going to deal with words. I'm just going to draw for a bit. And this started my journey of trying to understand my world through images and drawings. The story of sneaky art is much longer than that, so I won't go into it too much. But over the years that I have been a creative, writing became a thing, blogs became a thing, and I immediately had a blog, and I started writing stories and poems and little jokes. Then images became a thing as Facebook started to spread, and suddenly comics became a way for me to tell stories too. I started a webcomic because suddenly it seemed that the visual medium offers another vehicle by which to tell important stories, by which to make important jokes about unimportant things. As these platforms evolve, so does the way we consume them. As these platforms evolve, as creators, we respond to them, but also as readers and viewers and users, you are informed by the platform, by the medium upon which you consume what you consume. In the famous book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, Neil Postman wrote that the medium is the metaphor. The medium through which you take in information determines how you perceive it, the context within which you read it, and how you start to understand these realities that it is teaching you, these stories that it is telling you, and how they implant themselves in your mind. So these are generally the ideas that I really want to explore with the lovely people we have on this panel. And I would love to begin with this general question of comics and graphic novels and ask, because these things are so often perceived as things that children do, and then we grow up and we only read fiction or nonfiction, simply books without images. I want to ask, perhaps, Payal, maybe we could begin with your initiation is perhaps not the best word, but the moment that you thought that comics and graphic novels were an important storytelling device in today's time. And maybe we can play some of Payal's PPT.
Thanks, Nishant, and it's a pleasure to be here. I come to this as a 100% skeptic. I was not trained visually. I am flanked by practitioners. I make no claim to a visual practice of my own. And born to a librarian, I was used to words. In fact, words were the only way I made sense of the world for a long time. And I think what started to happen a few years ago is that they were an incomplete way of making sense of the world for me, because I still found that much is happening in the world around me that I am no longer equipped to cognitively process, because it happens, as you say, visually. I mean, one could get into semantics and say even the act of reading is a visual act. You process the forms of words, right, and letters. And at some point, I realized that there was a dimension of cognition that was both underdeveloped in me, and that I had sort of shut out of my mental landscape because I was not a visual reader in the sense of images. And that has actually been transformative. So when we set up Qomix Classics, of which I'm one of the founders, another founder is a practicing graphic artist herself, and so on. I was the outsider, the skeptic, the convert who said, finally, I see a way of understanding the world that requires me to do different work from reading. And I think that's really where I'm going with this, which is that I see the graphic medium as a way of understanding the world, no differently as I see words as a way of understanding the world. And therefore, I would say I see it as a language, right? Not a medium, not a genre, but a language. When we say in our time, I think the medium has preceded us here. The medium was ready for the moment. We're sort of slow getting here, because those who have read the graphic medium, I think, have always known how to read subtextually before, beyond, and after words. And I think that makes for a completely elevated comprehension rather than thinking of it as only a form of reading. I think the graphic probably subsumes words within it, but words don't necessarily subsume graphic within it. So with that, Sarnath.
Yeah, I love what you said about all of those things, especially the idea of it being a visual language, because this is something we process independent of words sometimes. The beauty of great art, the beauty of great graphic novels as a result, is not only that the art supports the words, but that the art is a conversation in itself, asking us, showing us, because we are all equal humans, we all carry this capability, showing us how to process so much information, for lack of a better word, which is deep and emotional, but so much information that is sometimes outside the scope of what language can do. On that note, I would love to hear Sarnath's experiences with graphic novels and how you came to choose this as your medium of expression. Can we play Sarnath's PPT, please?
I'm not sure whether it was a good choice, because many years after doing comics, I heard my mother telling the neighbor that my son can't draw very well and can't write very well. But because his father is from Bangladesh, which means that there's a Bengali split between people who've come from East Pakistan, and he's clever, and he's put together and calls it graphic novel. Now, please tell me, if I have to read, why do I need illustrations? Is my imagination like handicapped? Or if I have to watch a image, do I need explanation? Am I dumb? It's a good question. I'm still trying to answer that question. Answer is that it's a bit like tomato. You know, Indian cuisine, what you do with a tomato is that you can do something with a tomato that only a tomato can do, but it's nothing like tomato. You know, it's the original of that tomato kind of does not exist anymore. In the process of doing that, we release a lot of ghosts. in our narrative. Spectral beings, you know, when we say na, the lines lachak raha hai and all that, it's something that a lived experience and as a practitioner and someone who does comics, you would know that the slowness of it and the experience of it and the psychological state that you go through to create that things that you want to express but you don't have the right words, you know, sannata, depression, panic, ghabrahat, all that sort of stuff. I realized that you can do it with comics in a simpler, quicker way. Not that you want to make it quicker. And that tomato metaphor is working because
Everybody likes tomatoes.
you want to feel how it, like for example, this image about this person, like, you know, in a box. It's about a father trying to, this is from my new book, by the way. It's called Absolute Jafar. And it's one of the primary thing is about this father trying to put a child to bed, and there's like bedtime stories that he tells, trying to kind of evoke Karachi and Calcutta in the mind of the child. Now, this is all about like mental spaces, themes, not about narrative so much. It's how you feel. Yeah. So what I try to do is to try to resurrect how I felt, you know, badly remembered things, you know, tightly told nothings. So these are abstract ideas about comics. And I disagree a little bit about comics being as a visual medium. I think comics is a text medium, and you literally have to, a lot of comics people don't understand this. They do fantastic drawings, and you see the drawings being projected and stuff like that. But I do feel that it is about how you, writing a novel is easy because you have all those words and you can make many versions of it. But when you know yourself, and when you work with each word comes like has a hammer and put it together. Even an is important in comics. So I do think it's a very textual medium.
Yeah, I agree so much. Like, a comic is in so many ways the ultimate distillation of the action to the fewest number of frames with which you could do that job. And sometimes it's words and images, sometimes it's just images, sometimes it's a lot of words supporting a little tiny image. But it's what I found in my experience, trying like Sarnath to be a writer and artist both. For a few years, I had a webcomic. I used to draw with stick figures because I wasn't good with drawing. And then I tried to push and tell bigger stories. And because I'm very opinionated, I thought only I can do what I want to do. So I thought I would write and draw both. And eventually, at some point, I want to come to the masochism of this exercise, because there is no greater torture than trying to write and draw and trying to be your own editor and trying to tell yourself when that final stop happens. So you can see what brings Sarnath to this state, and you can see why someone like me, different from him, had to jump out of it and find something else to do instead.
But Nishant, I have a question, because when you say you weren't great at drawing, to be drawn to a medium that seems to hinge on having that gift or skill is interesting. So that also speaks to the fact that something more is going on, obviously, with being drawn to the medium than the actual technical practice of the medium, right? What was that thing that made you think I can make comics though I can't draw? Or, well, I'm sure you can, but like at the time you thought you couldn't.
You know, every year as I grew up, there was access to more and more information and more things being produced around the world as the internet grew more sophisticated. And every year since childhood, I have seen artists that I wanted to emulate. And I used to think I need to be the best artist to do this, so obviously I'm not the guy to do it. But then I would find a webcomic that showed me, you know, just stick figures can do it. I found xkcd.com, which is one of the longest running webcomics of all time. And I realized if you can package it like this also works. This is actually a very good lesson for art in general. The technical brilliance or skill is not enough by itself. If you can communicate the thing you wanted to say outside of the technical value, it can still succeed. The job of resonance with a reader is not about technical brilliance. It is about connection, and it is about perhaps more unspoken things. One of the problems of this panel is that we are trying to put words to things that can sometimes maybe not be communicated in words. Guys, can you please also put my PPT? Maybe some of my images will say the things I'm trying to say. because I started drawing because I was sick of words, and I thought words don't do the job anymore. So I'm going to walk around and I'm going to observe my world and I'm going to draw what I see. So sneaky art means that I sit in street corners and I sit in cafes and parks and I see the people of my world and I draw them before they're gone. The sneaky aspect is that I don't tell them and they never find out. I'm very sneaky. I'm very good at getting away with it, and I take a lot of pleasure in getting away with it. So I don't tell them, it's none of their business. I got my drawing, and I only have a few seconds. At the right corner, you can see my son when he was still not able to walk. Drawing a baby who is just learning to crawl is very hard because they don't pose for you. They don't have any patience. They're very inconsiderate, and they just do their thing, and you have to learn to adapt to that and go very, very fast. I'll get out of this in my book, but we don't have to look at this. One of the things I understood is this. One of the rules I set myself was that if I see something, I'm going to draw it. If it catches my eye, I draw it. And the idea of art as a way to have, without words getting in the mix of it, art as a way to direct our curiosity. So a drawing not for the sake of making a beautiful drawing, but a drawing as an act of attention, as an act of attention given over time, as an act of directing our curiosity towards the things we find interesting, and finding in a sketchbook this permission to observe my world. As an immigrant in the US, trying to understand this strange new world full of dramatic characters, by allowing myself to spend time in public spaces and see what they do, and a drawing as a way to understand without words, without overt connections. And I think this is something that so resonates with the work you guys do as well. And I want to, maybe this time we can start with Sarnath, because I want to go to your comic and I want to ask you about this business of how a comic helps us to preserve our ideas of the places we have been, the things we have seen, and how that becomes something we share visually rather than, again, talking about it.
So I think photography.
Let's play Sarnath's PPT again.
Photography, I think, is unreliable because I feel much of what actually is worthwhile actually happens outside the photograph. So if you're like taking a picture of like a family photograph of everybody standing there and Bunty is smiling, Vache khuli hui hai, Niagara Fall behind, and everybody looks happy, but there might be a creepy uncle in that gathering, all sort of things. Photographs don't really reveal much, and sometimes, what is important is outside photography. Comics, using this pictotextual stuff that sounds fancy, or you can create, like I was saying, a sense of how it felt during a particular time, how it felt those torpid afternoons in Delhi when nothing would happen, and the interesting thing that you were talking about when drawing in the street corners, what happens when you're drawing in the streets, I also did a few of that. You create, you slow down. And as you slow down, when you look at, you create an interaction between the object that you're drawing and yourself. So suddenly that milk booth becomes not a milk booth, but Nishant's milk booth. Because you develop a relationship, an uncanny relationship forms between that scooter that you're drawing and yourself. So you like bring things alive. And I think this has definitely got something to do with healing, which is why I am kind of not a big proponent of productivity, volume, streamlining, mainstreaming, comics read by hundreds and hundreds of people, because I come from a genre where people have sort of, largely doing comics. They don't want to stop doing whatever they're doing. They just want to keep on doing, because it's definitely extremely a healing process. So, an AI has kind of, interestingly taken us away from that, because it talks about the final product and it's nothing about the final product. Who gives a shit about the final product? It's how you got there. And yeah, AI can't, one thing the AI still can't do is that they can't make it slow. If they have to make it slow, they have to put in a slow filter to make it slow, synthetic slow. But everything we arrive is a slow process, and it's fine. We are like, you only said that there's so much images around. We don't need so much images around. We don't need so much distribution. But I guess, I mean, I'm sure you would have a different point of view about that. So I'm interested to see that.
Not different. First of all, I will say that in the process, and just to give everyone a bit of a context to what we do, so Qomix Classics was set up to say there is the greatest texts ever written, and now I do mean texts, in a sense become the greatest because they transcend their own context. So something becomes a classic because it is not of its time, but of all time, right? And when that inheritance, civilizational inheritance, if you call it, if you will, there's a sense today when I look around that the older, greater books now show up only in syllabus or curricula. They show up under conditions of stress or compulsion. They do not necessarily or easily show up as a theater to explore the greatest stories ever told, right? And what happens to societies that lose that relationship? I would say that documenting or marking the present, broken from understanding the past, we know the consequences of that in every domain, right? And literature, in fact, is that sort of wonderful, insidious resistance that does not look like resistance, but is. So for us, the reason I give this context is the necessity of bringing great literature into a different grammar, right? In which it could be read both by people new to it, but also read anew by those who are familiar or think they're familiar, was an imperative. And so Qomix Classics essentially takes the greatest books ever written, and over the course of the next few years, we hope to do this with 500 or 600 books, a library of universal classics, comicized, right? An invented word, but yeah, that's really the idea. Now, where I agree with Sarnath in particular, it is slow, and when I say slow, I mean this, it is gratifying to have to, I have never read, I am a reader of text, but I have never read with the care that I have read in order to think of that now afresh as a visual story, right? And it requires you to read outside of the words, it requires you to read subtextually, it requires you to both remove your understanding, form a new understanding, form how to visualize that understanding. And I say, I don't now just mean this, obviously, from the version of people who create. It requires you as a reader to do this afresh, right? And I think that that cannot be done, in fact, without taking time, right? So if I have read Kafka, say the Metamorphosis, which I have read multiple times at different stages of my life as a textual work in translation, and when I read Kafka to work with a group of people to turn this into its graphic telling, something entirely new happens, right? And I'm saying that that time, which you speak of as integral to the process, is not lost, though we do, yes, use technology. We do, in fact, yes, use. And that's also, and I don't know how much we want to get into that conversation. I'm happy to get into it in detail. We do use generative AI tools as well, but this is work of human judgment. And I would say, at the risk of, the AI conversation, like any other, will over time require that we give it the complexity it deserves, because it is not a shortcut for us. It is not a way to bypass modes of creation or create. This is, when we set up Otter, we work with 40 or 45, as I was telling you, of the greatest comic book artists from around the world, to do work only they can do, what you were saying, the work of observation, right? What we are doing, and as an example, and that book is not in the bookstore, but I hope we will have it out soon, we commissioned French graphic novelist Nicolas Wilde, who most famously did a Kabul Disco trilogy of books based in Afghanistan. He hand drew conflict storytelling, across 3 volumes. And we sent him into Russia at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war to say, just tell us exactly the act of observation you're speaking. What are the Russians thinking, right? We often hear from the Ukrainians, or we hear, of course, from politicians around the world. But what does the ordinary Russian think about this conflict? And he has drawn an extraordinary volume. He has spoken with regular Russians from across the spectrum and drawn this extraordinary work. which only he can do, which is imbued with every attribute you have spoken of. What we are saying here, when I think of graphic adaptations, adaptations is an inadequate word, transmutation, I would say, of the classics. I'm reading Woolf, because we have A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf. I'm reading Woolf, and then I'm going back and reading Woolf visually, and now I'm thinking between those gaps of my first reading and this new reading, and interpreting that into a graphic form, right? I think these two things do very different things in the world. I think they not just coexist. I think what we set out to do is, in that sense, like I said, the stories that demand moving into the future, or deserve moving into the future, we're bringing back into that consciousness. But I absolutely agree with you that the act of creation is the point, not the outcome, not the product. And I think it is possible to deploy technology from that sensibility.
Let's go towards that act again, because Sarnath, you said something lovely. You were talking about a process of healing, and you were talking about images and photography. And this is something that I am also very concerned with, and let's connect it to technology a little bit. So technology helps us do things very quickly and at lower cost sometimes. So it's very easy to take pictures now, and wherever we go, we take pictures. And sometimes I feel that because of how easy it is, it's also very cheap. If you can do a thing with zero effort, if you can do a thing at zero cost, if you can do a thing instantaneously, and if anybody can do it, that thing does not have value anymore. Where does value lie is a question that was very important to me as an analog artist, as a person who chose to be an analog artist. I've done a lot of digital art before this. And one of the things I came to is the subject of information, because I have a background as an engineer and I've worked with a lot of big data. And a photograph, to Sarnath's point, has all this information in it. It tells you light and shadow. It tells you what was what. It tells you if creepy uncle was standing in the corner, and he's right there in all the lit glory under the sun. But when you choose to draw instead, when I sit there and I choose to draw, I am not simply capturing the all of it as it is. I am also the editor of this scene. I am also, as you said, the actual item lies beyond the camera. And as the person there, I am also part of this scene in terms of my curiosity. What is it that I want to draw? What is it that I focus on? What is it that I do not focus on? What do I edit out because that is not what I want to give time? What do I exclude because I don't care for it very much? What do I not do because I'm just not in the mood that day? The person you are in that time and space determines the way that you capture that art, in my case. In Sarnath's case, there is so much processing of information, there is so much processing of memory. The colors you choose, the vantage points you choose, the angles you choose to depict something, the metaphors you choose to visually communicate, show something that did not exist literally in that moment. You can play with colors, you can play with styles, you can play with objects of depiction and focus. And all of that leads to this very abstract representation of that moment, which the human is doing in their journey. Me in that moment, in that space, Sarnath trying to deal with a very complex issue in that time. And as you explained so well, the way that you are trying to also reread and reimagine these works with an idea towards an audience that is now going to, that perhaps prefers to consume it in this way, that if it was not made available to them in this way, would not take that first step into discovering the classics and going back to the texts as they are?
Because I think Sarnath made that point better than I hadn't even gotten around to making it, that it is in fact a textual medium, very much so as well, right? It is obviously in the interplay, it is in, at its, nothing is perfectible, but for those who ever get close to it, the seamlessness and yet the parallel processing that you're able to do, I think the cognitive work, so for anybody who thinks reading graphic is easy, they must be born geniuses, because I think it takes labor and cognition from you. And I think it is important to do that work. It ostensibly, I think, feels easy because it's scaffolding you in different ways, but you're actually processing, to my relatively new to the medium for I, you're actually processing the world much closer to how the world operates. Graphic processes it much closer than actually language, because you do process your world at multiple sensory levels. And so, you are, as you go, as we're sitting here, you are watching us, you're listening to us, a lot is going on. I think graphic embodies that in various ways. So it is it's a medium that demands the reader do the work as much as those creating the work. It is not hence, I would say, not so much about how people like to read or making it easier. It is probably that we are finally close to that mode that comes naturally to humans.
Like digesting rajma, it requires. But listen, I think we have. We can. If there's any question, we can take some, or otherwise.
I think let's get some final comments in. Let me put a final question to you guys, and then we'll turn to questions. So my final question is now about the reader and about the people who read graphic novels, the people who read comics, the people who look at art, and even people who look at people who do little drawings like I do. I wonder about the point of it. Why should anybody read comics? Why should anybody read a book? Why should anybody look at art? And one aspect of it is obviously to enrich yourself with this great feat of human ingenuity and creativity and enrich your life. But I feel the primary job of art in our lives, music and literature in our lives, is to inspire us to also create. Because we are human beings and each of us has the equal ability to create things. One of the things that I really love that we're talking about a lot is process. And I feel like the more we stay with the joy of process, the healing aspects of process, the educational aspects of rereading and reinterpreting a text in another light, in another medium, the idea of drawing instead of taking a quick photograph and getting away with it, of spending time and giving attention in all three of our work. One of my favorite writers is a quantum physicist, Carlo Rovelli, who said that attention is a unit of time. How much attention you give to your world is how much you stretch the time you have in your life. And time is this subjective thing. When you don't pay attention, it flies by. And when you pay attention, it is suddenly so large. And time is, of course, a unit of your life. So I want to ask you about the value you see of human effort and imagination and creativity in how your arts play out and how your works play out, and how you see the reader responding to what you do and potentially picking up the decision to do the same. Sarnath?
No, I'd love to hear what you have to say to that first.
Let's do a minute each so we can make sure we give like 10 minutes to the audience.
I'm now getting on and I mostly do things for myself and a small group of people who still read my stuff, and occasionally a new person pops in. Because I live in Europe, and there's a critical imagination deficit in Europe. Everything in Europe, Europeans only understand things on their own terms. And I have to constantly tell them that nobody wakes up feeling post-colonial in Delhi. So a lot of it is based on trying to explain a bend backward to kind of, give context and tell people that back in my native tongue, I'm actually funny. But I've stopped doing that also. So now I just primarily write my own story, and the Absolute Jafar, which is the new book, I mostly stolen from Jafar, who's based around my son, who's an Indo-Pak Shia child. And I've mostly stolen his stories. At one point in time, he wanted a salary. And I said, he wanted 60 cents. So anyway, so that's it. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, go on.
No. So I think for me, because I will speak to the classics in particular, which is really where the thrust of our work is, I think you learn how to be human through engaging with literature. I think that's why, we are all here at the scale that we are. And I think that everything from learning how morality works, power works, human beings work, identity works, cultures work. I think storytelling, but literature in particular, is at the heart of it. And if that is not worth the effort, then we're saying that to be human is not worth the effort.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Good timing.
Yeah, that's beautifully encapsulated. And okay, we have some time, and I would love to turn it around to you guys and maybe have some questions. Do we have people with mics waiting to run towards the other? Yeah, of course, of course. So maybe we can start with Swati in front.
Yeah, then we can answer.
Yeah, let's collect 2 or 3 questions and then we can
Yeah,
get into
a
it.
warm good afternoon to all, and thank you for the lovely panel. Sarnath, my question is to you, because your latest graphic novel is deeply autobiographical also. So you, through your alter ego Bhrigu, are dealing with middle age, a broken marriage, and yet documenting a kind of heritage history for your boy, Jafar. Now, that for me is a very danger area because you're documenting for your child and that stays for posterity. What I want to ask you is that how do you stay away from the bias of being an honest documenter of your own story vis-a-vis cannibalizing your own life for art? And how do you get a balance? Because see, your story is not just for the audience. Your story, you don't get to shit about the audience from what I understand you as a person and also from your book. But you do care a lot shit about your child. As a lot of us, these mad bongs do. Forgive my stereotype. So for me, it's deeply, it's a question I ask myself. So I want to know an answer from you. How do you bring in that equilibrium?
I
Thank
love
you so
that
very
question.
much.
Okay, let's pick up some more questions. Maybe the gentleman over there.
Also, Rohit in the middle.
So my question is for Payal and for the panel in general. In a world that is already filled with so much of propaganda, how do you see these literary sort of classics, whether these are stories related to partition or, Babri demolition or some of these monumental events when translated into these images and, iconography can be exploited by a certain group of people, and how do you see you're going to control or resist that?
All right.
Thank you.
Can we have another question maybe? Maybe the
Rohit in the middle
more,
has a
more than,
question.
More than 3? Sure. Okay. So maybe that side.
We see
in the brown.
to your right, yeah, there. Okay.
Yeah.
My question is to the panel in general. I would really like you to unpack the tension here a little bit, because what's happening is that throughout we've spoken about the importance of the journey of writing and observing or sketching for the joy of attention turned towards ourselves. But we're all here because your works are getting published, because we are able to engage with your published works and then understand what you mean when you're talking about that interiority. So while, yes, who gives a shit about the final product, but we're all here because we do. So if you'd unpack there's a tension between those two things.
That's a really nice question. Let's take one more and then we can just answer things. Maybe over here in the corner.
So my question is for all of you. When I write novels, and so when I write, there's always a movie going on in my head, and I feel like a sort of ghost in the works, sort of watching these people who I'm terribly fond of doing things. So in a sense, I just find it really hard to imagine that if you're going to turn a classic into an AI, use an AI to generate something, images. I mean, I love comics because it's, as you said, it's a very personal thing. You see another person's view, and because there's a human behind it, I always feel I can relate to that vision. But I just wonder how with AI and AI-generated images, whether there's a difference, when you do that.
All right. So we have a set of questions, I think, that we can work with. Yeah.
Sure. So in particular with the last question and also the earlier, one, I will say, and like I said, that's actually probably a longer and a separate conversation, but when I speak of our use of certain AI tools, generative tools, it is a very, very human act. I will say that this is not about throw words out there and generate images and put them together. We have, and I would love for you to see some of the works. Oh, I know they were on the PPT, but the books are in the store. And there are human editors, human artists, human designers, immersing themselves over months in a work. Like I said, reading textually, they are literature graduates at their highest powers, interpreting a work, right? And the part that one could call, if I were a hand-drawn creator, I would call it part of my process to draw by hand. But if I were a digital artist, I'm already using a tool at that stage, right? If I was somebody using whatever tool I am, right, that is the part of the process in which technology comes in. So while I absolutely agree with you, if this were some kind of indiscriminate, let technology have its way and produce an output, this is not what we're talking about. And I think we will need to start thinking much more with both the healthy skepticism that we need to have with technology, because in a perverse way, I will say these final books that I would really love for you to see in particular, because you raised the question, they're actually an act of resistance to algorithmic culture, because their classics predate like market logic. They resist easy distraction. When I'm asking a young person today to read A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, I am actually resisting everything the market tells me today, right? Or, I mean, any of the dozen classics that are already out, and there will be hundreds more. The mode of production is not always a fair judge or judge alone of the value of the work, and there is a question about value to be had. This is work we approach with great care. This is work that I would not spend my life, frankly, if you wanted to make easy money off making graphic work, which nobody on the stage is, there's a world of entertainment to be done, right? And I'm not saying that's automatically easy, and I'm not dismissing it. I'm saying literature is hard. Graphic editions of literature is hard. It's not a shortcut. It's not an easy answer. And sorry, just to come to that question, which I'm going to hand over. The risk for abuse exists inherently in much. The subversive power of literature, my contention there would be, if you read with care, you understand what is meant and what is alluded to in ways that actually then resist that distortion and misuse. So can you guarantee images will not be misused? No, you can guarantee nothing. Can you, in fact, hope that the act of engaging with that complexity, which you otherwise might not, gives you a better understanding of the world? You can, so that's...
Yeah. So thank you for that answer. I'll touch on the question about process and result. The only way to run a marathon is to think about the next step. But of course, the point of the marathon is that you finish it. So you want to get to the end of the marathon, and then you get to wear the medal, and it feels great. But you can't get to the end of the marathon if you're only thinking about the end of the marathon. You have to think about a step and a step and a step. So a large part of the creative process lives in the process. If obsession with results matter, because results are what live on, results are what other people see, but thinking about the result is not how you get to the result. The only way you get to the result, and I'd love to hear from Sarnath as well, is by staying in the trenches and spending your time with the process.
Yeah, I'm a bit nervous. It's only 1 minute, 30 seconds. So I'll very quickly try to...
Very fast.
2 questions I can respond to. Swati's question about, I'm forgetting things. It is a recreation of a Delhi, of a different kind of a Delhi. And it's not a book of nostalgia. It's a book of reclamation of how we felt, when the city was as dark as Kinshasa, and the only place where you can have a beer if you needed some light was outside Ames, and so I'm forgetting that world. So part of it's not a work of memoir, so it's not non-fiction. It's fictionalized thing. So my child, who is heavily based on Indo-Pak child, I mean, he hopefully still has the sense of humor or whatever to kind of see through all that kind of thing, through conversations, all that. So partly this is my resistance from the act of forgetting, which I'm rapidly forgetting. And it's like, when the last house of the neighborhood goes off, very soon you forget. When a house is taken off, even the shadows stay for a while and then it disappears. To answer the question about the lady there, is what I meant was not like only writing for myself, whatever. It's a ability to emancipate myself from the expectations of, like, for example, even Instagram and all that. Your work starts getting like sort of, you want to be liked. Everybody wants to be liked, and then you want many followers, and you see one worked and the other did not work, and slowly your work kind of gets graduated towards that. We all wanted to mainstream.
Didn't know there was a sound.
Just one sentence. We all wanted to be mainstream at one point of time. Then my friend Chetan Bhagat and Amish told us that don't go there. So we all were happy. Thanks to Chetan, thanks to Amish.
Thank you so much for giving us your time, for giving us your attention. It's been so lovely speaking to you.